Hello, I'm Andy Johnson, and welcome once again to this special series in the series Shepherd's Corner with the Archbishop of Port of Spain, the Reverend Charles Jason Gordon. This episode, we will be talking about the church in society. Good to have you once again.
Good to be with you.
All right. Let me start by asking you, what is your statement now about where the church is in Trinidad and Tobago society, Archbishop?
You know, big question. The church in society has gone through so many different configurations. Today, the church plays a vital role in many sectors of society. So in education, which we've explored, the church is a fairly major player with nearly as many primary schools as the government and 20 secondary schools. In the health sector, so through Living Water, there's a rehab center, there are 2 hospices that we run. In the social delivery sector, there are many different organizations that are doing incredible works in Vincent de Paul Living Water Community, Eternal Light Community. Many of the parishes have outreach to people on the fringe of society. So there are incredible connections with church and society, and the way that the church is influencing, shaping, and caring for those most vulnerable within society. And that itself is a position that the church has taken as a very conscious position, that we will be there for those on the fringe of society and find ways to reintegrate them into the heart of the society.
You get a sense that, what's your sense, let me put it this way, about the way in which that kind of work is appreciated generally in the society?
You know, I think we have an ambivalence on it. When people understand the need, they're very happy that the Catholic Church is there doing all these things. And when people see the church asking for this or that, why is the Catholic Church getting this and why is the Catholic Church getting that? Not understanding that what the church is asking for is not for the church itself as church to run, but the church as a social delivery arm of society that is doing incredible work with those on the fringe of society, helping them to reintegrate into society. And so that's a very different thing. So I suppose we've been here the longest, and so we've settled roots in the social delivery more deeply than many of the other churches that have been established. So and religions. So that ambivalence. Why does the Catholic Church have such a voice, or is saying something about this or that? Well, because we are working directly with people who are on the fringe.
Yeah. All right. But we're having this discussion on the day after an editorial in the Guardian newspaper addressing the situation with crime in the country, and the editorial is asking whether it's not time again for sort of an inter-estate coming together to address crime, the church, the government, the opposition, civil society, and others, the business community. What's your statement about that?
You know, crime is everybody's problem, and it affects everybody. Crime don't have a color, class, a creed, a race, a bank book. It affects across society. And I think to change crime in Trinidad and Tobago, it has to be approached on many fronts. So, yes, the police commissioner and the Minister of National Security are pushing down one front that is very important, and that is to bring discipline where discipline has not been had for a very long time. But on the other fronts, I think we have to push hard also, which is that, I mean, I've made the statement that if we want to solve crime in Trinidad and Tobago, every citizen has to do something. This is not about one public officer waving a magic wand and somehow getting the thing right. Every citizen has to do something. We have to want to become a more disciplined society. And that means that we can't have our lifestyle and have a safe Trinidad and Tobago. We have to make choices now. I think we've gone for ultimate freedom in Trinidad and Tobago. You know, there was an article back in the 1870s or 60s in the Gazette saying that Trinidad is a ramshackle democracy, country where everybody has a say on everything and an opinion on everything. And I don't think that has changed. That ultimate push for freedom that has been so much at the core of the Trinidad and Tobago society and psyche, I think that has to be challenged now. I think we have to now understand that freedom has responsibility, and we have to start disciplining our people, young and old, towards responsibility. And that's going to be painful. But that's how we're going to change the crime situation, because the crime is based on levels of indiscipline that have allowed to levels of criminality, that have allowed to an economy based on illegal criminal activity that has the power to infect and to corrupt higher levels of officials in society.
You know, with that having been said, on the situation of crime, when a lot of people lament the state that we are in, and they talk about all the institutions, which some people use the term fail. So, you know, institutions have failed us, and they put the church in there. Some people say the church has lost its voice, its authority in addressing issues.
Well, I would say yes and no. Are we involved in Asian crime directly? We have some initiatives that we work with, like the rehab center. I think is one way of addressing crime. By moving people from addiction out of addiction, because that's one source. I know in Gonzales, the project that was started when I was there, that Bishop Harvey continued on City, that initiative continues going, doing education for the kids, socialization, giving them a sense of purpose, of vision, and where they want to go. Computer literacy, and all sorts of other initiatives to help the young people of Gonzales really think and move in new directions. In Betham, we have a chapel that is open 24 hours a day. The chapel, anybody could go into the chapel at any time, and the community that goes there for Center for Peace, they go on a regular basis. They walk that community. They talk with people. They're well respected, and the only thing that was ever stolen out of that chapel was a Bible. Yeah. I told them, put some more.
Right.
In Sealots, we have the evangelization team of the Archdiocese has been going into Sealots on a regular basis, 2-3 times a month, walking the streets, talking with people, trying to help people settle things down, trying to give young people access out. In fact, we're looking at a project right now in Sealots where we'll put looking to establish a school, a vocational type school in Sealots for the young people who are not doing well in regular education, to have an opportunity to come through that and find themselves within the society, to integrate before we get them to crime.
Right. And there's some people who say that approaches like these are even more important than what we come to call crime fighting. These things are about preventing people from getting into crime rather than having to lock them up and put them in jail. And
I agree. So if you take the medical model, you have a patient that is bleeding. You better go to triage and stop the bleeding. But you also have to stop the source of the ailment at its root at the same time. And I think we have been much more at stopping the source of the ailment at its root in terms of working with Serval. I mean, what Serval does on a daily basis is incredible in the society. And I don't think people have really understood the contribution to social development of an organization like Serval, Living Water, Eternal Light, and all these organizations, St. Vincent de Paul. I don't think people have understood the contribution.
Why you think then the narrative had been created that the government was in a crime plan that the government had called for, bringing all different kinds of people together. One of the recommendations was for the state to adopt what was called the Serval model to address the issue, and that was rejected.
You know, politics is a very funny beast, a real funny beast. And unfortunately, in a small country like ours, the cost of politics is very, very high. So one government starts an initiative and gives it some funding. So the next one comes, think that they have to reject it because they didn't start it. And that, we're not large enough to have that kind of foolishness happening. And that, I mean, I think things should be evaluated on their own merit. It's like the same problem that there is with when all members of all boards have to change every time we change a government. We don't have 10,000 people in this country who could sit on boards. Evaluate which boards are working. The government could decide these 5 industries are vital to what we need. We need our people in it, and that's fine. But don't tell me we have to change everybody. So this mentality that we have, and I would say, you know, it's that we are more tribal than democratic as a nation. That we operate like a tribe. We don't operate like a democracy. Within the parties, we have a tribal sense. So a political leader is a political leader until they die, either politically or physically. And that lack of democracy, and that lack of putting nation before the people and before the development of our people, that's a serious challenge for the development of Trinidad and Tobago. We should be evaluating what is important and what is working well, and then support it.
So to the extent that there's an agreement that we have to have this multi-partite approach to addressing crime as it is known to exist now, as the leader of the largest denomination in the country, and that is something that I think the church is proud of, even if there's a lament that the numbers are being reduced. Do you see yourselves in picking up the phone and calling the Prime Minister and saying, well, let's get together, let's bring everybody together, if that is what is necessary?
Anything that is required for the development of Trinidad and Tobago, count me in with all my energy. Because at the end of the day, the church is a servant of the development of Trinidad and Tobago. For us, Pope Paul VI coined the phrase, authentic integral human development. That's the development of each person, every dimension of the human person. And he says that is the vocation of the church. That's how God calls the church, for the development of people. And therefore, we don't have this kind of division between, oh, no, this is a church thing and this is not a church thing. Anything that is about development of people, the church has a call from God to be involved in that. So this is not an optional extra for us. We do our church thing and then we do a little something to help society. Our task, our role, our vocation is for the development of people. And that means that we have to be there where development is required. If we've come to the place where there is a move towards having a multi-sectoral group work through the challenge of crime, I would happily be part of that and happily do everything I can to promote that development.
But as the Archbishop, would you see a responsibility maybe just down the road to try and initiate that and influence the players who have to be around the table? So
there are areas like crime and other areas where I have seen a dire need, and I would initiate the meeting and have the conversation and therefore be available to do what is required to move the thing forward for the sake of Trinidad and Tobago. I've done it before, and I would continue to do it because of how vital it is in the country at this time.
Yeah. Let's go back to what you said just before that about the church's mission to develop the whole person. I'm happy you raised that, because just last evening I was at a forum hosted by the Equal Opportunity Commission, in which they were talking about living with dignity and what the definition of the good life is. Mm-hmm. And two people from different religious persuasions knocked their own religious persuasions in terms of addressing what they see as the way in which religion impedes people's right to dignity on the question about freedom of choice for such things as abortion and divorce and separation. But I've seen ways in which the current Pope, Pope Francis, has sort of taken off the restraints on that for people. Is that new in the sense of liberation that is being seen now, being led by Pope Francis on some of these issues, or is it just a progression?
I think it's being seen differently. What I would say is that we've come out of an era, 100 years ago, where the church was more what I would say is political. And certainly 200 years ago, when we still had papal states, the Pope was not only the leader of the Roman Catholic Church, he was also the monarch over the papal states. And so he was a temporal leader and a spiritual leader. Once we lost the papal states, then the church became much more of a spiritual leader. And that evolution, I think, is one of the best things that's ever happened to the church. Because our business is not in having political power within society. Our business is influencing society towards the good. And I see that as two totally different things. So if you have a Count Fimber Ryan, who was an archbishop in a colonial era with a title like Count, that's mixing the political and the temporal power in a colonial era where a count was a minor functionary within the state. So his understanding of being archbishop totally different from mine, and I think Anthony Panton brokered that difference by being, when he died after the funeral, there was an editorial that called him the conscience of the nation. And I think that is the highest acclamation an archbishop can have. That he was there as a moral guide. He didn't have to agree with everything, but everybody knew that he was trustworthy in his own person, and therefore his voice, he came with no political power, but his voice was a moral voice, speaking to the good of the nation, and also speaking to the conscience of the nation. And I see that as the way that an archbishop in our time should be functioning.
Did he ever discuss, or do you know to what extent he may have expressed his feelings about having been called by Abu Bakr on the night of the attempted coup in 1919? He walked from Archbishop's house to TTT, I presume by himself, in a situation in which everybody was inside or being asked to be inside.
Yeah. So I never had that. We talked about that generally. We talked a lot more about the 1970 events, where he got himself caught in the midst of a march and don't march. But by 1990, he was the oldest serving official with an office of any rank in the society. He at that stage, he was nearly 30 years, no, he was 20-something years an archbishop, because he was 68. So that he became archbishop. So he had tenure, he was here, and so calling him was not an unusual thing. And the nation would have trusted him, as Abu Bakr would have trusted him to negotiate at that stage, as the government trusted him to negotiate at that stage, because he was a moral voice who had been very consistent. He never tried to become a politician, and he never posed as a politician. He never used political power that his office could have used, because that's not how he understood the office of the archbishop. And I follow into that thing where I would initiate things that are things of conscience. I would push forward for things that I believe important for the development of Trinidad and Tobago. I would speak out on social issues. I mean, in the last year, there are many issues that I've spoken out on, but I make it a point not to speak out in a way that is trying to determine a future for the country, but to say what I believe is right, and then come back away and let the conversation continue.
Or to openly challenge those in authority, because you get a sense sometimes that people at different points in our history, right here, in authority, actors in this state, sometimes see the church as a competitor in terms of influence for people, and to some extent, political leaders try and want to keep the church in this place.
Well, they have their perspective, and I have mine. My perspective is there is no issue of national good that is outside of the remit of the church. And anything that has to do with moral conscience, anything that has to do with the development of people, anything that has to do with right and wrong, and false roads towards development, I think the church should be speaking out on them. And should have its say. Why? Because if we remain silent, how are people going to understand the direction that we are going and have a critique or an understanding of why this may or may not be the best of directions? So in Barbados, and I've done it here already too, I've fiercely critiqued the liberal capital model that the society went towards that created this accumulation of wealth for some and this poverty for the rest. And that shift in Barbados in the 1990s, where they wanted to become first world nation, created the poverty that Barbados now has. Because before that, they were in a social democracy. And that social democracy ensured that there was never a great gap between the very rich and the very poor, that education, health, all these things were socialized so that the development of people could be had. And once we went from that to the liberal economy, then the gap started to widen. And that gap created the anger and the challenge that Barbados is facing today. And I think this is no different in Trinidad and Tobago today.
And some people say that those are the roots of the discontent which themselves spawn crime. So how do you go about addressing? How do you redress that order?
I use this phrase all the time. Once we went to the 50-cent creed, get rich or die trying. Once that became the creed of the nation, from top to bottom, nobody's excuse. Religion and everybody thrown into that cabal. Once we went to that creed, we lost our moral compass, and we lost our sense of right and wrong, and we lost our way in the world of nations. Because that creed meant that corruption became excusable and expected, because you either get rich or you die trying. So whatever you had to do to get rich, you're going to do it. And the guy on the street will do it with a gun, will do it with drugs, with pushing, with this and that and the other. And the guys with the white collars are doing it in different ways. But I would say that corrupted us as a nation and shifted the course of Trinidad and Tobago from my grandmother's values to a set of values that she would just not recognize anymore.
Now, how would you propose leading a reordering of that and a redressing and pulling back from that and changing course?
Well, the starting point for me is not out in the public arena, although I will speak to it in the public arena. The starting point is really in the soul of the individual Catholic, in the parish community, and what we do to help Catholics understand what it means to be a disciple of Christ in the 21st century, and among the priests, to help the priests to understand the responsibility of priesthood in the 21st century Trinidad and Tobago, so that this is the kind of thing that has to start from inside out. Whereas I will make statements about it in the public sphere, I think the individual Catholic has to be invited to discipleship, and a radical form of discipleship that really helps people to understand how do we put the gospel values first before the national thing that we are bought hook, line, and sinker. Hospitality. I mean, my grandmother's generation were incredibly hospitable. They shared what they didn't have, even when it was meant going without for themselves. We've lost a lot of incredible values that we used to have as the mainstay of Trinidad and Tobago society.
But the thing is that there are generations of us who remember it, sometimes wistfully, correct, and we look back. But the difficulty is to re-embrace it. Are
we willing to re-embrace the values, recognizing that it is the current set of values that has us in the crime situation we're in? It is the current set of values that has impeded the development of our nation. It is the current set of values that we have all bought into, hook, line, and sinker, that has created the dissonance between the Trinidad and Tobago of the 1950s and its value system and the value system we're now holding. And therefore the escalation of crime, the escalation of corruption, the escalation of the indiscipline within our society.
Yeah. You referenced 1968 as the time when the late, great Archbishop Pantin came in. It was a period of turbulence all over the world. And it happened.
68 revolution.
Yeah. And the church at that time, and for a decade after that, seemed to occupy a different space. It was more, my term, radical. You
yes.
saw that in some ways.
Yes. So 1968 was the Paris riots.
Yes.
Vietnam, pushing against Vietnam.
Black power in the
Black
United
power
States.
in the United States, black power in Trinidad and Tobago, and civil rights in America. It was a year when Martin Luther King was assassinated. It was a year when the people's power erupted onto the national stage internationally. And demanded justice in society and a kind of a freedom in society that was unprecedented. It was the young people having their say and making their voice heard in a way that had not happened before in society. But it was also the year when the television camera was able to leave the studio and go out and gather the news and come back and show on the evening news what was happening. So it was a shift in media that shifted consciousness, that shifted the consciousness of the nation and of the world community. The church, in the midst of that, had just come out of Vatican II. And Vatican II was a turn towards the people of God, and a turn towards a sense of a church in service to the world, and a turn towards a church that is not caught in a sanctuary, but a church that is living in the midst of all of its people, and with a preferential option for the poor. In Latin America, Gutierrez in 1968 wrote his famous thing on towards a theology of liberation.
Liberation theology.
And the whole liberation theology started in Medellin, which was a conference for Latin America and the Caribbean. We were represented at that. And that shift towards a church engaging a social gospel and a social engagement became part of what we experience here. Now, one of the things that shocked me was that by the time I came to the seminary in 1982, none of that was seen. And in fact, my whole doctoral work was answering a single question. How come the demise of Caribbean theology by 1982? That single question. Because it was shocking when I understood what happened just a decade before I entered. And what was then transpiring when I was there. And what was shocking is the players of the 1970s were running the seminary in the 1980s. So it's not as if they took them away and put a whole new set of people in, but the whole thing had gone flat.
Yeah, and the 1980s became known as the me decade.
Correct. But that shift is a global shift. So up until 1973, the world was and the economic system of the world was in a regulatory system. A regulatory system regulates tariffs in and out, but it makes the local more important than the global. After 73, we went to a deregulatory system, liberal capitalism, which makes the global more important than the local. And with that shift, you had a move away from all of these forces that were moving. All of them became quiet in the 1980s, all of them. But this is a global shift, and it affected us deeply here. So that by the 1980s, a lot of these social outreach and pushing society, and so that shifted, and we became much more complacent, I think. And in a sense, we stopped the cutting edge of our social engagement. But the church remained doing the things it was doing, but the whole world had shifted in this way also. And that's why I like to talk about the church shaping society, the society shaping the church. Because we are immersed in this society and in the civilization.
So in the period leading up to when you went in the seminary, was there that sense that in that period in the early 70s, when the Catholic news was my term?
I wasn't reading Catholic news. I was in Fatima College, studying my A-levels, O-levels, and A-levels. So I only really would have ventured to Catholic news when I was in seminary in the 80s, in the early to mid 80s.
But there was a sense that it was louder at that point. Probably.
But the whole church was louder. You had the Terry Julian, you had Boyd Reed, you had all these towering figures that were out on the forefront of this debate of church and society. Was it a better time or a worse time? Well, it was a time. And it had its ethos, but its ethos has to be understood by the shaping forces of the society of that time. My argument would be that whereas the church shapes society and the society shapes church, The church has to become far more clear about its own mission, so that regardless of the global tidal forces or the local forces, the church has to become far more consistent in the way that it sets about to do its work. And the starting of that is getting the Catholics to an understanding of discipleship, of missionary discipleship, and why the value system that you're living with has to be shaped more by the gospel than by the ethos or the society or the television or the media of the day. And that's really the challenge facing the church.
What would you say is the state of the tethering with the church and that mission now in
You know,
21st century?
I think all religion is finding that a difficult prospect. All religion in the West is finding that a difficult prospect. Those who come from other countries, like the Africa, the India, the Philippines, they are having that conversation in a very different way than we are. In the Western framework, secularization has run so deeply in our society that it has really shaped the minds and imagination of people. Therefore, the religious imagination of people is not where we were 50 years ago, 60 years ago, where the church was all important for people, and therefore the church and her value system kind of filtered everything else you saw. We have to go back to that with our people. It will be a smaller church. It will be a much more challenging church. But I think when people start to come back to that sense of God first and everything else after, the social issues of the day, people of faith are going to make their voice felt in that.
Yeah. And let's talk about the church's role in trying to foster. We talked about it earlier, about the paradigm we live by now, in the issue of economic and social challenges facing the society now. Mm-hmm. Yeah, where you see...
You're talking about the get rich or die trying, you're talking about the
paradigms that we're using now,
okay.
And they're not meeting what the spiritual needs of people are.
So one of the things that is happening, we're going through a phase now where people are leaving institutional religion in large numbers. In America and in Trinidad, I know in Barbados, the nuns are the most steady rising group within the society. The nuns are the people who say they have no religion. Doesn't mean they don't believe in God, but they just have no religion. That's rising. That, I think, is a consequence of the rugged liberal capitalism, where we really feel that we're independent of God and of everything else, because we have come to a level of self-sufficiency and of surplus that we don't need God. We don't need anything else. Whenever challenges happen, that starts shaking a little bit. We need to be able to help our people regardless of what the external conditions of our society, boom or bust. Yeah. To have God first and to live by a moral code, a religious code, a sense of being a people of God. And that has to become the forefront of all of our people. Then these other things that are happening in society will impact us, as they should, but not to the extent that they are impacting us right now. And that's where the pastoral plan for the church, what we're working towards in this first phase of changing the Sunday experience, all the things that we're working at for the first 5 years is really to deepen that sense of discipleship of the average person sitting in the pew.
So what's the nature of the discussion taking place with yourself as head and the priests and people in the parishes on this issue? Is that conversation? And
deep conversations. So we've done several conversations with the priests. And I like to do the open conversation where we would do the presentation, and then there are tables, and they would present at the tables, and then they will come back and we've had a great sense of buy-in and understanding. Yeah, this is the right way to go. But the plan has been shaped by the priests. So we had 2 meetings with the priests where they got the information, they beat it up, turned it around, challenged it, pushed at it, and came back up with a way forward. So they've been instrumental in terms of how we're going. The lay people have been instrumental because the priests have taken it to their lay people and done the same thing and come back again. So the priests have had 4 engagements, 2 as priests, 2 as priests and people. And so now I've been going out to every vicariate and having the conversation in the vicariates with the leadership of every parish. And those have been incredibly fruitful conversations where people have been coming up with all kinds of interesting things and challenging and asking questions and asking for the implications of this and that. But that's how the church really does its role in shaping society. When the Catholic is a disciple who makes a gospel the first core of conscience and consciousness, and therefore becomes the filter, the gospel becomes the filter for all decisions in the family, in the workplace, in church, in society, then the church impacts the society for development in its deepest and most meaningful way.
Yeah. And there seems to be a sense, at least in the parish of which I'm a part in Santa Rosa, that there's a greater and greater call for the flock to get involved in the work of the church in different ministries.
Yes.
Is that something that is driven across the archdiocese?
That's part of this process, because the idea is that there are so many things to be done, and the priest cannot do it on his own. So one of the things, the first thing we done, we brought a little team around the priest, that he's to pick his people, bring them around him, and it's called a ministry animation team, and that's to animate the ministry of the parish. So that they are supposed to see the needs of the parish and the parishioners and help to animate new ministries and old ones renew them. And do this so that the average Catholic who comes to Mass on a Sunday starts to feel a sense of involvement, but then takes that back into their workplace, takes that back into their profession, takes that back into their family. And therefore family, workplace, community, secular space start to become infected or challenged or transformed by the Catholic who is living their discipleship consciously.
Yeah. And so it's probably unfair for those when there are people who say that the church must do more. The church is not doing it enough. The church is not meeting its mission.
Remember, you have both things, eh? Because I mean, in the year and a quarter I've been here, people have said, why is the Archbishop meddling in politics? And why is he speaking out on these issues? You have that too. So the church will never win. And I don't want to win. What I want to do is be faithful to what I believe my call is. And that is to raise the stakes of discipleship for the people. So that the people are invited to live discipleship in a much more conscious way. And through that, really start challenging at its most elemental level the assumptions of our society that have brought us to the place where we are right now, where we are collapsing in so many ways. And through that, then, on a national stage, from the Archdiocese and from the Archbishop perspective, speak about ways of being for us as Trinidad and Tobago that are far more coherent with great value systems than what we actually live in right now.
Yeah. And talking about some of the social issues, again, where they start from, how they come about, there's this view that a lot of it is rooted in what is referred to as sort of weak family structures, single-parent homes, mothers who don't have what it takes to talk to their sons or talk with their sons properly, fathers who are absent. Wow, how you address that?
Absolutely. I've been going around to the prisons. Every month I go to a different one and hear confession. That has been eye-opening. So I've met kids, 13 years old, who are in for having guns. And mom couldn't control them. And they said that. They said, mom tried, she really tried, but I stopped listening to her. Now, when you have that at the underbelly of your society, where not the school, not the village, not the church, not the scouts, the football coach can hold that kid and move the kid away from this destructive course that he's on towards a more constructive course. We have a problem in this society, and a significant problem. The challenge that we face with the kids who have been underparented and who have gone wild by 12 and 13 is a significant challenge. Now, I met that when I was in Gonzales. And the first day that I saw it, we were in a community event, and it was the first time that they had a small goal football for 4.5 years because of the crime and the gangs and all the rest of it. And I worked with them. We had it, and that evening they had a community event, and I saw some 8- and 9-year-old children doing things with their bodies that you really needed to be a teenager to understand what that meant. And what was more shocking was that they were, all the other kids were around them, the teenagers were around them, the parents were around them, pushing it on.
Dance moves and
Dance
this kind
moves.
of thing.
Dance moves. 8, 9 years. These kids were not in puberty yet. Their bodies had no clue of what those moves could actually mean at that stage of their life. But the whole community was pushing on this set of activity. And I said, but there's no parenting in this place. Absolutely no parenting. Because the parents themselves were acting like the kids. And encouraging the kids with the stuff of the kids. Now this is just a slice of the whole of Trinidad. The parents have stopped being parents. They are into the same foolishness and therefore pushing the kids on. And that was the day that I decided that we had to do something far more structured than what I was doing before. And we opened the internet cafe within 2 months of that. And that was a place where they were parented. And the person running the cafe was a young adult. Their mandate was, whatever happens inside of here, I expect these children to be disciplined. And if they're not going to be disciplined, you ban them for a week. They came in and everybody respected that space. A homework clinic, a football club, a dance club. We had Tricanal doing music. We had some of the best coming in. And everywhere that we touched the kids, there was one point of reference, parent them.
Yeah.
Discipline and a sense of right and wrong.
It seemed as though it took a lot to get that project going, involved people from Canada,
Yes.
Resources from all over. Was it meant to be sort of an incubator of what was required for attitude change, for social change among young people particularly?
It was an incubator. But it was really a project for that community where I happened to be the parish priest. But it involved the whole community. And if you want to talk about church and social change, that was a great experiment.
Yeah.
Because between myself and Bishop Harvey, who came after, we pushed on that community in ways that moved that community from ways of thinking that were settled to new ways of thinking that opened up brand new horizons.
Yeah, well, the question is that there are many other communities where the church has a presence which need that kind of thing, or is it, as people say, you do these things, the social change projects, that each one has to take from the community, and communities are different? Are they so different?
So it's both and. It's both and. So the government, at the same time, I remember Prime Minister Manning in his budget speech, 2006, said there's a community in this country that is doing amazing work, and we're going to do projects like that all over Trinidad and Tobago, Pride in Gonzales. And he named the project, and he said that we're going to do that. But when that started up, rather than working in collaboration, they worked in competition. And rather than, and then this again where we undermine ourselves. Rather than coming and say, okay, you all have been doing this already, partner with us, let's make this thing work. They actually came into Gonzales and undermined what was happening. Now that happened when Bishop Harvey was there more than when I was there, because it was just starting up when I was leaving. But rather than all of us holding hands for social development, it becomes a competition between this one and that one. One of the things I wanted in there was a Panyard theater, where we could have had the Panyard as a theater for the performing arts. They had 14 groups of arts in Gonzales and around. 14 groups? That's amazing. But then I saw Gonzales, or this side of the bridge, as a cultural capital of Trinidad and Tobago. That side of the bridge was the fiscal capital of Trinidad and Tobago. We put in the infrastructure for the fiscal capital. We never put the infrastructure for the cultural capital. We need an Academy of the Arts on that side of the bridge. We need a center for performing arts where people can come any day any weekend and have performance, and people be paid, and that becomes their employment. We need to create a way of people moving between East and West Port of Spain that is seamless, so that everybody has skin in the game for the development of the communities. That's how, if you can't create legitimate business that has its own life and has its own ethos within a community where people from outside can come to it, if you can't do that, you create ghettos where crime is going to flourish.
Yeah. But to do that, does it require sort of spending more time there, or is that part of the church's mission? And you have to do that work as well as preach, and teach people about faith formation and faith development.
So, in a wonderful document by Pope Paul VI, he says, "Action on behalf of justice and the transformation of the world is an integral part of the preaching of the gospel." So the transforming of the world and action for justice is not an option, or is not a somehow extra. It is at the very core of preaching the gospel. And that's why I start off by saying that the church's role within society is not to be aligned with this group, that group, or the other group. It is to be a voice for social development. And not just a voice, but an action for social development within the society. And that's the best that the church can do in offering the gifts the church has to the development of Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah. I want to go back on the point of the responsibility of parents, whether it's
Yes.
single mothers, or whether it's where sometimes where you have two parents in the home, but the situation is much different, because the parts of the literature say that fathers are around, but just physically. And
I am not as convinced that it's only about illiteracy, which is at the bottom end of society. I have seen the challenge of parenting right up the social ladder. I think we don't understand the impact that happened when cable television came into to Trinidad and Tobago. So that was in the 90s. And then the internet came by 95, 96. And then social media started to flourish somewhere in the 2000s. We don't understand the impact of that on the child. Huh? The children started to see that the parents were really add-on extras, and that they really rule the roost. Because in America and in England, the two dominant countries we look to, the role of the parents was significantly undermined in several very specific ways. Yeah. And then when at the same time you tell a parent they can't beat a child, then the parents start feeling they have no power over these children, because we never taught them how to do discipline without the strap. And there are many, many ways. So I say, it's a toolkit. The strap should be right at the bottom of the toolkit. And you have all kinds of tools on your top level, your middle level, before you reach to that. So we never taught people that. So the one tool for disciplining a child was the strap. And you take that away, the parent feels like if their hands are tied behind their back and they can do nothing. So we've lost a generation of children because between the social media and the pulling away of the strap without educating the parents. I'm not in favor of the strap. I don't think it's the right way to discipline a child, not in the 21st century. But I'm in favor of the parent understanding that they have to discipline the child. And here are tools that you can use without the strap. We never did that work. And so we copied what was happening in foreign countries without having an educational drive, again, development, for the parents to understand how to do this thing without this tool that your grandparents and their grandparents and their grandparents used.
But there are some parts of the church where the preachers quote the Bible on this business about sparing the rod and spoiling the child.
That's not a biblical quote, by the way. Don't find it in the Bible. So, it talks, and the rod was the rod of discipline, not the physical rod to beat a child. And the quote is not that. That's a quote from an English poet that takes a Bible verse and puts it into that and becomes memorable. But what I would say, we want to, again, in terms of our contribution. So the Franciscan Institute, partnering with Family Life Commission, we've been doing parenting courses for many, many people throughout Trinidad and Tobago. In schools, in parishes, all over. And not just for Catholics. So in the schools, all the parents. are invited to do this parenting course. It's called Common Sense Parenting. And again, it's helping the parents understand the tools in their toolkit for discipline and for the growth and development of their children that have nothing to do with the threat and with anger. It really has to do with propositions and helping a child to start making better and smarter decisions so that the child learns how to make those decisions. Now, if you want to make an impact in society long term, then the parenting is one of the critical things you need to do. The education of the child and the education of the parent is absolutely essential if you want to do the long-term change away from where we are to society of justice and peace.
And that is happening?
We're doing a lot of work with parenting. We're now redoing our marriage preparation to include a lot of new things we hadn't been doing before. We're doing a lot of work with couples to help strengthen couples in their relationships. We're doing a lot of work with marriage generally because we see that the odds of couples staying together in marriage are getting slimmer and slimmer. And that's because of the social pressure on the family. Because if you come into a family where it's all about me, and the other partner comes in, it's all about them, there's no all about us. And that's the problem. Yeah. How do we help couples understand what maturity really looks like? That maturity is when we are able to turn away from ourselves towards the other for the higher good and make a sacrifice, which is giving up something good for something that is better. These things that our grandparents taught us by stories and by actually witnessing it by how they lived, we have to start over teaching it because we've lost it in a generation or two.
Yeah, something keeps sort of recycling in my head from the discussion, from the point about my reference to both sparing the rod and spoiling the child. We could have a whole discussion on that, the way in which, in a lot of cases, the Bible is misrepresented, it's misquoted, taken out of context and used.
Using it for people's own good.
Yeah.
So I keep saying to people, we have our lenses. We have a lens through which we look at the Bible. So as we have lenses through which we look at the world, you just look at Fox and CNN on any given day. you just choose your day at random.
For the last 3 years, one story.
Longer than that.
Different.
But longer than that. But look at this one and then look at that one. And hopefully you could hear the same story being spoken about on both.
Yes.
And you have to ask yourself, but what planet are these two people coming from?
From different perspectives.
Because the lens is prior to the facts and to the truth. So it's no longer about the truth. It's about making sure that my lens is the lens that everybody believes is true. And therefore, there's a commitment that people are making prior to the truth. And that commitment is creating the noise within our society and the fact of fake news. Because if you have a prior commitment, then you will have fake news because you're not committed to the truth of the thing. You are committed to ensuring that your ideology is going to be seen as the truth. And so the ideology becomes more important than facts.
And talk about how, as the leader of this church, you address those things in the minds and in the lives of people who are part of the church.
So, different ways. So last year, for instance, I had 7 lunch meetings with Form 6 students, where I brought together 5 from one school, 5 from another school, so it's 10 of them around my lunch table, where we had open and honest conversations about all kinds of things. It was amazing. And listening to the young people and seeing where their interests are, seeing where their mind is, seeing where they're thinking. Then I met with 300 and something of them for full day retreat. Again, just to be able to listen to them, but also to help them now thinking in a different way. Having listened, start to shape another way of seeing the world. For them, seeing their life as vocation, as opposed to what is the opportunity or the economic opportunity or the profession. Start thinking vocation. What is God calling me to with this wonderful, precious life I have? And how am I going to respond to that? And start rethinking and helping them to rethink the secular understanding of living in the 21st century to a much more religious frame and framework that would give them the tools to see religion, faith, spirituality, Sunday worship, and life in a much better connection.
Yeah, I want to put these two things together, given the time we have, and see how you address them. One is, I want to go back on the question of the specialized responsibility, if we call it that, of addressing fathers as fathers, quite apart from parents. And the other one is, there's this live issue about the church's mission in addressing the situation regarding Venezuelan refugees to Trinidad. A lot of people don't understand it. A lot of people object to why we aren't even embracing it.
So on the fathers, this year, March 19th, we launched a ministry to men. Because I am absolutely 100% convinced, unless we can get men to play their role as men of God, and therefore as fathers, as mentors, as people who are within the church and society, who are living the right way and doing the right thing. Unless we can do that, we can't move society forward. And so that whole men's ministry is a way of inviting men to discipleship in spaces that are going to be for men. Because most times when men, they're so drowned out by all the other things that doesn't quite resonate, it's hard for them. So that one, we have a big push on that one. And that's one of the initiatives from this year. The Venezuelan one, this is both a national and an international thing. So there's been conferences in Rome with the bishops from Colombia and those bordering nations talking about what we need to do to help Venezuela. And so Rome has its own position on it that is very consistent with the position I have taken here. I think you were the one that saw that and raised it in one of your news articles, that the bishop is only doing what the position of the churches. But it again starts from development. How do we have thousands of people come here and we not do something to help them to live a life that is above the law? And how do we allow them to slip into the informal economy? People say that we are helping the Venezuelans because they're Catholic. Well, I have never heard more rubbish in my entire life. Living Water has been dealing with refugees from Russia who are atheists, from all parts of Africa who are Muslim. We had a Muslim guy living in our house at one stage for a very long period of time who was a refugee because it's the only place we could get for him to live. So it has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with race. We've been doing this for people from Bangladesh, Africa, all over the world for a long period of time. What this one has to do with is the sheer numbers. That the numbers that were spilling onto the streets of Port of Spain became an epidemic that nobody wanted to name because we had our heads in a cocoon. And so my voice raised on it to say we can't keep our heads in a cocoon because we're going to have an illegal sector developing that we're not going to be able to control. We have to go for the development of these people, bring them in, and start working to integrate them.
Yeah, and part of the mission is to keep educating the rest of us who are behind on it.
Correct. To help the rest of the country understand that this is not because we like to do this. This is what people do in civilized societies. If your neighbor's house is burning and you lock up your house and you don't help your neighbor, what kind of society are we going to have? And the day your house burns, you're going to want somebody to open doors and help you. And that's how civilizations work. And that's what Christian people do.
And that's where we have to leave it for this episode. This has been another episode in our discussions with the Archbishop on this program, Shepherd's Corner. I'm Andy Johnson. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.